Hello, welcome back to From Soft Serve, where today I'm announcing a new update for my DS3 mod, but I've also renamed it, which I wanted to do for a while. I've renamed it Embers, which of course, with DS3 and the fire truly fading and nearly died out, Embers felt like the right name for it, obviously inspired by the Cinders mod name. Not really what Cinders does, but the name itself I thought was great and straight to the point. It just sounds sick as hell. The Embers mod is not a reshade, and these are the things that it does. It adds dynamic shadows to almost every object and map piece in the game. Lots of these objects were not set to cast shadows. Like right here, you can see that, like, for instance, these chairs were not set to cast shadows originally. And then this wood piece up here was actually not set to cast shadows. There were tons and tons, and then the grass casting shadows. There's so many things in this game that were not set to cast shadows. Like this weird stick-looking thing now casts shadows. So there's just way more shadows. And then your torch will now actually cast shadows on yourself, your player character, and the world. And I had to manually do that. But yeah, you can see I have the shadow from the giant dark sign, but then also there is torch illumination and shadows just from the torch itself. And there's like the different levels of it, obviously, as you lift it. And you can see even the grass gets shadows on it, so it's still a little quirky. But now you actually have shadow casting, and I'll show that better once I go down there. But yeah, so we have that. We also have a removed player lantern. You may have noticed that normally your character has a light coming off of them to illuminate dark areas. I have removed that. Because Dark Souls 3 really didn't need it. And in my testing, I haven't noticed any sort of challenges with that. It just looks better. So you're not, weirdly illuminating everything that you're running by anymore. You're actually just in the environment. And so basically, yeah, you just fit into the environment like 10 times better because you're not illuminating stuff anymore. So this is actually a really good example, is you walk in here and it's just dark. And then you can illuminate with your torch, and you'll see shadows come off these little vines or sticks or whatever the hell they are. Yeah, they're vines, right? And you can see the shadows actually now cast off of those, which is sick and very cool. Because I wanted it to be like Dark Souls 2 in that way, where Dark Souls 2 was really cool with its torch, where shadows would come off that and it cast onto the environment. And my Dark Souls 2 mod takes that farther. But for Dark Souls 3, they just didn't have the torch cast any shadows or anything, which was sort of weird. I think Elden Ring is the same way by default. The other thing I've done is I'm going through the maps up until Lothric Castle currently, where I'm adjusting the contrast from 0.5 to 0.8 in the params for the levels. So now it's less monochromatic. So there's just more contrast. As simple as that. Because the game by default was very, very monochromatic, and the visual identity was very bleak, and that makes sense. But I wanted there to be a little bit of a dash of color added back to the game without needing to use a reshade. Not that I have any issue with reshade, but I know some people are like, I'd rather just install a mod, and then it makes things more contrasty, and I don't need to download reshade. So that's what this would be for. Other than that, in this level, I have modified, not just modified, I've removed blue point lights. This game relied heavily on false blue point lights that they would just place throughout the game to illuminate certain things, but it wasn't based on a light source. They would just put them in many places because they wanted to, and commonly not just because they wanted to, but really it was for playability. Because they would say, oh, there's a chest here, or the player can drop here. So I think it was from like play testing. They were like, okay, let's actually like illuminate certain things, not based on any light source. So it's not really realistic, but that's fine. It's Dark Souls. It doesn't need to be realistic. But I wanted it to be a little bit more immersive, to where whenever you let your torch out, can't see much of anything in here because you don't have a player lantern anymore. So I think it raises the stakes a bit. And not exactly a challenge mode, but I think it is more challenging, if that makes sense. And so yeah, removing these blue point lights is also another way of basically adding contrast to the game, but in a very manual fashion. And so that was a big one. The other thing is improving water reflections. So by default, a lot of things were not reflected in the water. They had a decent amount of things. Yeah, basically I had to go manually through and set a lot of things to reflect in the water. You actually have to tell each object what is reflected and what is not. So it's really cool, and you can add extra things somewhat easily, but you know, you have to do it. And so I was actually went in manually selecting each tombstone in like the untended graves, and okay, you're going to reflect, okay, that big tomb's going to reflect, and so you can actually make that look even better. And the other big feature of the mod is mesh LODs. Dark Souls 3 had a big issue where as you're walking, you would see geometry pop in all of the time because it was switching to a different mesh LOD. And this is a completely normal behavior for a modern video game, right? You should be doing this, right? But the problem is they did it in a pretty bad way where you would see it all of the time, despite, you know, on max settings on PC, you could still see the meshes changing all of the time. Like if you go in the Farron Swamp, it's terrible. They're just literally changing the meshes out in front of your face. And so I've adjusted that to where now it's pushed out far enough to where the goal is for it to not be noticeable at all. It's still happening, but the player will not see it. So that is a big visual boost that the game needed badly. So I've adjusted that. I've also adjusted the texture rendering resolution distance. So like it'll render higher resolution textures from farther away, and so it should be less noticeable that it is swapping to a lower resolution texture. Beyond that, and the reason why I've called the mod Embers, if you've made it to this point, thank you. After all of these changes, the most recent change I've made is, as you'll notice here, like these torch holders or wall torch sconce related things. Throughout the game, I have extinguished most of these because I see the fire as, well, the fire is fading and it's nearly extinguished, and that's sort of the backdrop for DS3, right? And so my idea was to not rely on those torches for illumination much, but you will see candles still lit. And that was kind of my idea of like, okay, so the candles could provide illumination, and it just sort of reinforces that the fire is truly almost faded, so that you're only having like candles that are being extinguished, and they won't last very long either. And so that's sort of my idea for the mod, is there are certain fires, like little bonfires here, but overall the amount of light sources is reduced, which goes along with removing point lights and tweaking other lights, and because I want it to be less reliant on fire as a light source, because, well, the fire is fading, and so it just made sense to me to rely a lot less on that. And so Vort's room here is actually another example of lighting changes, where you can see basically the spotlight that is originally set up to cast inside of here has been boosted to where the light is shining right through these doors once you open them, and you'll see the shadow, dynamic shadows being cast all the way outside there, and you now get this really cool shadow with the gate being reflected in that shadow as well. So these are the changes you can expect. And Undead Settlement was actually a big beneficiary of the shadow changes, because it had tons and tons of little map pieces and things that could be rendered and have shadows cast, but by default it was set to not. Wow, I have to admit, I have not gone back to a lot of these areas later in the game and having this giant dark sign. I've played through Dark Souls 3 like 10, 12 times, something like that, and I've never actually gone back to see how fucking awesome it looks. Holy shit, it's boosted by the contrast as well. And you can see the big giant guy over there shooting arrows. That's so sick. I've never noticed that. I think it's because of the contrast of the sky here, but oh my god, I love it. But this is a good example of like all the dynamic shadows that are added now in the game. Oh my god, this is really showing off the added contrast for sure. Delightful. And so you can see like this carriage having a nice dynamic shadow. And there's just so many things that were not set to have shadows. I'm sure I've set shadows in this video like 5 bajillion times. But it's truly transformative, I think, for me. I mean, the base game obviously looks great. And this mod simply is not anything of what it is without the original art design of the game, which I think is just truly like god tier. But I personally felt it being a little held back by the monochromatic nature of it. And so unlocking the contrast, I think, just lets the game assets really shine, you know, and that's my ultimate goal, you know. So all these dynamic shadows that are now being cast from everywhere. Oh my god, I needed to go back to these other areas. I've never done this. I usually am just like continuing on in the game. But yeah, I had to adjust the dynamic shadows, and like you can see the mesh LOD over there is still really high quality. Like it's still rendering the high quality mesh. And the other things I want to look at, I will be looking at textures. I do want to upscale some of the textures. Some of them are fine, but as you can see, like the wood texture here is terrible. The stone texture is decent, but this wood texture is god awful. And so there are still a lot of textures in this game that need to be upscaled. So I do plan on doing that, because I'd like this mod to be like an all-in-one style mod that can really bring everything to the game that I want to bring to it, and upgrade areas and bring it to a higher visual quality, at least to a 2020-ish standard, if that's possible. Because I still think DS3 looks great, geometric density, and the texture quality is just really the low spot. The mesh LODs was a low spot for it as well. And the anti-aliasing is unfortunately one area where I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to improve that, as it does not have TAA. It has FXAA. And I can go into G-params, and there's a lot of settings for the FXAA. So I need to look at what they're doing for the max setting and see if I can take it farther. FXAA has a certain, like, it is limited, but I'm curious if I can improve it. Even a 10% improvement in the anti-aliasing quality for Dark Souls 3 would be huge. So if I can make that 10% improvement, I will. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. It was a very quick look at sort of my visual overhaul, but now called Embers, which I think is just so much cooler sounding. Oh yeah, these lanterns. Well, I guess that's actually a candle in there. So I've been trying to, yeah, once again, rely on candles as a light source and not torches. So basically it's a much darker game, if that's the quicker way of saying it. It's a much more contrasty and dark game. How did I not get this object back here? Oh, that's because repair powder? Y'all don't need that. That's one of those things in the game that are just not needed at all. But yeah, up here is a good example of how many extra dynamic shadows there are that are being cast in this game. It's so many. There's so much work. I know I could multi-select and like turn on shadow casting, but I kind of wanted to do it to not like utterly destroy performance. You can expect lower performance with this mod versus unmodded. I would assume it's probably 20-25% less performance. It varies on your build, you know. Obviously if you have a computer good enough to run the game at 60 FPS, but like way above that, then you're not going to notice any performance difference in the mod. It just depends on your setup, but it is heavier than the base game, for sure. There's just a lot more shadows. The meshes are rendering at a higher quality. The textures are rendered at higher quality as well for farther on. So yes, it is heavier, but I think it's worth it, and I honestly think the game needed it. So if you enjoyed this video, sub to the channel would be greatly appreciated. and then share it if you think there's other Dark Souls nerds that might like a Dark Souls 3 mod. And it's version 0.2 right now. It's on Nexus. You can download it, and I'll keep updating it. I need to get past Lothric Castle, and then the DLCs I need to work on. I haven't done those at all, but I'm up until Lothric Castle right now. So there's a giant chunk of the game that you can play with these changes, but I will be quickly working on in the game, because I actually have to play through these again. But luckily I've done it many times now that I don't think I'll have a big issue getting hit by a wall or anything. Mid-ear probably will be difficult, but I'll have a lot of fun with Gale. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.